Hello, the topic for today's discussion will be English language teaching. I shall be focusing on error analysis in English language teaching. I shall be covering today the following. Number one, the historical background of error analysis. Number two, error analysis and definition. I will try to see the difference between error analysis and mistakes. I shall also be trying to show the difference between the approach to error analysis. Number one, the behaviorist school, and number two, the cognitivist or the mentalist school. I shall be trying to search for the sources of errors in English language, and then I will go for the aims of error analysis. I shall be trying to identify the types of error analysis. Different types of errors are there, and learners' errors and error analysis shall be studied. The study of errors, as Corder has suggested, I will try to see the steps that are taken in the research and then the contribution to EA, error analysis, in the second language teaching. There are also some limitations in error analysis, and with that I will be concluding my today's lecture. First, the historical background. If we go back to the past, we find that error analysis developed as a branch of applied linguistics. And in applied linguistics, we have the application of the linguistic theories to the study of English language teaching and learning process. Basically, Pitt Corder proposed a theory of error analysis, and this emerged in 1960s in the works primarily of S. Peter Pitt Corder. Error analysis can be defined as a technique which aims to describe and explain the systematic nature of deviations or errors generated in the learner's language. On the other hand, the analysis of mistakes refers to a performance error, that is either a random guess or a slip of tongue. Mistakes are actually failure on the part of the human cognitive process to utilize a known system correctly. So language has a structured presence in our human mind, and any kind of failure to utilize the structure of knowledge or language with some error or mistake is the purview of our study. Usually the native speakers of any language make mistakes, but when attention is called to them, they can easily rectify their mistakes. Errors as seen by the behaviorist school differ from the errors seen by the mentalist school. While the school of behaviorism see errors as the signs of learning failure, the cognitivist school that talks about second language acquisition as a cognitive process regard errors as signs of language or linguistic development. This is a basic difference between the behaviorist school and the mentalist school. So for the behaviorist, the errors are signs of learning failure, while for the mentalist, errors are signs of language development or linguistic development. So in this lecture, we shall try to see the methodology of error analysis, particularly as it is applied to the analysis of the learners of language, especially the second language that we are dealing with, English as a second language. The primary focus of analysis shall be on syntax. Corder presents a model based on the distinction between an idiosyncratic dialect, that means the learner's personal, unstable, developing grammar, and he differentiates this idiosyncratic dialect from a social dialect. Social dialect means the target language, which is the dialect of a social group. Corder then illustrates the possible relationship between the learner's idiosyncratic dialect and the target social dialects. Then he goes on to compare this with a number of other dialects and social dialects relationship, such as evidence in the piece of poetry, in the speech of a young learner, or in the speech of an aphasic. Corder attributes great importance to the relationship of the mother tongue, relationship between the mother tongue and learner's dialect than others might. So he acknowledges that there are variables involved in the learning process. Similarly, Richards, while acknowledging the influence of the mother tongue on the learner's language, documents a number of other common features of the learner's dialect, often ignored in discussions of learner's errors. These are referred to as intralingual and developmental errors. These reflect the general characteristics of true learning. So errors are definitely part of the learning process. So there are processes of overgeneralization, incomplete application of the target language, even the application of the rules. There are also failures to learn the conditions under which such rules can be applied. There are also the misconception regarding language and the false use of language or false development of concepts. Some of these are seen to be reinforced by common teaching procedures. So Indian linguist Jain also sees this as a learner's language as manifesting a general learning strategy to simplify the syntax of a language that the learner is learning. Jain suggests that the motivation to add new rules to one's idiosyncratic structures decline once the degree of proficiency has been achieved, and this can be regarded as Skinner has pointed out, a kind of fossilization. So we have errors of different nature that emerge out. Error analysis deals with the analysis of errors that the language learner usually commits. So the sources of errors, according to Jack Richards, that I just said, can be explained with reference to 5 factors, and these are different types of learners' errors. First of all, let us take mother tongue interference. As we know that English as a second language has been studied in almost all the Commonwealth countries that were erstwhile colonies of the British Empire, and in all these colonies the presence of the mother tongue or the first language keeps on interfering learners' ability to learn the foreign language or the second language. So first point that Jack Richards points out is mother tongue interference. The second is overgeneralization. There is a tendency among the users of the language to make errors on the basis of overgeneralization. Then number 3, there are ignorance related to restrictions of rules. So ignorance of rule restriction. The learners are not aware of all the restrictions that are imposed, and linguistics, as we know, is highly structured. Every language is a highly structured. So rule governed language that has to be learned contains so many levels of ignorance on the part of the learner. Number 4, he also talks about the incomplete application of rules. So the learners usually wrote so many rules of grammar in the grammar schools, in the classrooms, and then they have this ignorance of the proper application of the grammatical rules in the conversational language. So this incomplete application of rule has been pointed out as the 4th source of error by Jack Richards. The 5th source of error, according to Jack Richards, is the false concept that is hypothesized. False concepts regarding language often is carried forward by the learners, and once these are internalized by the learner, these are counterproductive to the learning of language, and these cause enormous amount of errors to the learners. So let us now try to learn what are the aims of error analysis in English language teaching. The primary aims of error analysis can be identified as follows. So first of all, we have to identify the types of errors. Types of errors are also related to certain patterns of errors that usually are committed by the speakers of the language, users of the language. So we have to develop a kind of error taxonomy. That means the analysis of error in a very systematic, structured manner. So error taxonomy has to be established. Then we have to identify the common difficulties in the second language acquisitions, And once these are identified, the common errors in the use of language are identified, it is very easy for the error analysis, and on the basis of this error analysis is supposed to contribute to a kind of comprehensive knowledge and process of second language acquisition. In this process of second language acquisition, error analysis is required, so the learner will learn through trial and error method, and through rectification of the errors, a language is learned in the proper manner. In addition, results are also to be used for the revision of theories of language learning, as it also helps to evaluate and improve language teaching. This also is an important part and aim of error analysis. So we have different types of errors identified by Jim Corder. Jim Corder in 1974 identified different types of errors. Number one, he talked about pre-systematic errors. What does he mean by pre-systematic errors? According to Corder, pre-systematic errors occur when the learner is unaware of the existence of a particular rule in the target language. This is often possible, that the learner is not aware fully of the existence of a particular rule in the target language. These are random, but these should not be confused with mistakes. These errors are random. The learners cannot give any account of why a form is chosen. Say from active to passive voice, when the language learner is converting, he might not be aware of the conversion of an active sentence to passive sentence by inverting the structure of the sentence. The sentence has SB structure that is inverted in case of passivization of sentence. So this is pre-systematic error. That means the rules, these are not known fully to the learners, and these errors are committed because of this ignorance regarding the rules governing the use of language, especially the syntax. The second type of error identified by Corder is systematic error. The systematic error occurs when the learner has discovered a rule, but it is the wrong one. The learner is unable to correct the errors, but can explain the mistakes, mistaken rules that the learner has used. The learner can even identify the type of mistake that the learner has done. So this is more systematic. So Corder calls this a systematic error when the learner discovered a rule and knows that how this rule has not been applied properly in the usage. The third type of error identified by Corder is post-systematic error. Such errors occur when the learner knows the correct target language rule, but uses it inconsistently, makes regular mistakes. The learner can explain the target language, and yet he cannot simply put forward the proper use of that language in a consistent manner. So these are the three types of errors identified by Corder in 1974. What are these three? These are number one, pre-systematic errors, number two, systematic errors, and number three, post-systematic errors. So let us now learn what are the learner errors and error analysis. What is the relationship between these? The study of learner errors has long been a part of language pedagogy. So almost all the school teachers, even the college teachers of language, they usually identify the errors, and it is a part of the learning process, pedagogic process. Traditional analysis lacked of rigorous methodology and theoretical framework. So we have two types of error analysis methods, but error analysis methods should also be understood with reference to another analysis that is called contrastive analysis, or CA, that was developed during 1960s. Contrastive analysis, or CA, identifies the linguistic differences of two languages, say L1 and the target language, or L2. So the source language, mother tongue, or the first language is contrasted with the second language, and we have, through this contrastive analysis, the identification of differences, and such differences are easily identifiable and can be regarded as interference habits. So mother tongue interference we talked about. So mother tongue interference often impede in the learning process. The syntactical structure of mother tongue may not often match with the syntactical structure of the target language that the language learner is trying to learn. So we have the second type that we are discussing now, error analysis, that developed after this contrastive analysis. So contrastive analysis was used in the grammar translation method more, and then we have this error analysis in the 1970s. Error analysis provided a methodology, and it started from that axiomatic point for the study of learner's language and L2 acquisition. So second language acquisition becomes the focus of this error analysis. So we have different types of errors. Such errors are receptive errors, some errors are productive errors, as we said that some errors are systematic errors. We also have spoonerism, random errors, self-correctability is also a part of this error identification and correction, and then there are also performances of errors. So arising from the shortcomings of this contrastive analysis, we have to come to this account of second language learners acquisition, and a number of new researchers began in the 1970s in order to search for an alternative approach for the study of errors. Such approaches which would be theoretically more justifiable and pedagogically practicable in the actual classroom situation. This new approach, as I mentioned earlier, is based on the theories of first and second language acquisition, and also talks about the possible similarities between the first language and the second language. This is called error analysis. As a result of this new research in the 1970s, in the processes and the strategies that we found, a study of errors were taken up, and then with this kind of comparative analysis between the first language and the second language, the learner of the second language gradually became aware of the errors that are committed while the language is being used. This is because errors were seen as evidences of the process and strategies of language acquisition. So language acquisition can be of two types. The behavioral school talks about acquisition of language as a formulation of the habit through drill and practice. A person learns the language. So it is like parroting the language and learning the language, roting the language and then using the language. The second is the cognitive school that talks about the language acquisition as a part of cognitive process. So here we have different types of errors identified. These were seen as evidences of the process and strategies of language acquisition. So Menyuk, M-E-N-Y-U-K, in 1971 started claiming that the study of child's native language, learner errors gradually throw light on the types of cognitive and linguistic processes that appear to be a part of language learning process. You remember Noam Chomsky talking about the structural linguistics and the capability of mind to convert the kernel sentence into non-kernel sentences. Even the mind of the learner is capable of acquiring different types of languages according to Noam Chomsky, and there is a blueprint of language that is there always in the mind of the child. In the second language learning, a more positive attitude developed towards the learner's errors compared to what was prevalent in the first type of analysis, that was called contrastive analysis. So errors were no longer seen in the 1970s as a signs of failure, linguistic failure. So in the teaching and the learning process, errors were identified. Errors were even encouraged. In order to identify the errors, and the eradication of errors at any cost was the paramount problem faced by the teachers. So now the errors were seen as a necessary part of language learning process, as a necessary part of the cognitive process. Error analysis emerged as a reaction to the view of second language learning by contrastive analysis theory, which saw language transfer as a central process involved in second language and foreign language learning. Errors were analyzed, and error analysis tries to account for learners' performance in terms of the cognitive process, the processes that are there, and how the learner make use of the ingrained blueprint of language in organizing or reorganizing the input they receive from the target language. The primary focus of the error analysis was therefore on the evidence that the learner's language provide to to an understanding of the underlying processes of second language acquisition. So error analysis studies this unacceptable forms produced by the second language or the foreign language learners. So it was widely believed that language learning, like any other kind of human learning, involves the making of errors. So even a child learns walking by struggling through trial and error, by falling so many times. So language learning is also like learning to walk or developing any kind of habit. So different forms of learner errors were identified, and the target was then to identify the errors and move towards the process of proper rectification of errors. Such errors are to be identified by the self and even by the peers. In the classroom situation, the teacher's response to errors should be very positive rather than negative. So the teacher should not rebuke the student for committing errors. Rather, the student should be encouraged to identify the errors and try to understand why the errors are committed in order to search for a proper rectification of such errors. So we have the claim of using error analysis as primary pedagogical tools, and this was definitely based on three arguments. What were these arguments? Number one, error analysis does not suffer from the inherent limitations of CA, restrictions to errors caused by mother tongue interference. So error analysis brings to light many other types of errors frequently made by the learners, and such error analysis, unlike contrastive analysis, provides data on actual attested problems and not hypothetical problems. Thus we can have a more efficient economic basis for designing pedagogical strategies. So this is the second one. That means the error analysis, unlike the contrastive analysis, provides data on the actual attested problems and thereby address these errors from the pedagogical perspective, evolve certain pedagogical strategies to address these errors. The third was that the error analysis was not considered as a confrontation with the complex theoretical problems that were encountered by the contrastive analysis. So on the basis of these foregoing discussions, we can see that errors are inevitable. So do not make the students uncomfortable with errors. Let them be comfortable with errors, because errors are inevitable, and as we cannot learn a language, be it first or second, without goofing, so without committing errors we cannot learn anything in life. So similarly, errors are inevitable part of language learning. Number two, errors are always significant in different ways. So do not just put errors under the carpet. Do not brush errors under the carpet, because errors are significant in different ways. All the errors are attributable, but not to the learner's mother tongue. Always remember, all the errors should not be attributed to learner's mother tongue. So first language interference will always be there, but all the mistakes are not due to the first language interference. So it can be the source of error, a major source of error, but all errors are not to be related to mother tongue interference. So let us now see the difference between receptive errors and productive errors. So language has competence and performance. So competence and performance, again Noam Chomsky talks about this competence and performance in the use of language. So the words law and parole, Ferdinand de Saussure talks about this linguistic activity, law and parole. Law the basis and parole the performance. So competence in a language is of two kinds. One is receptive, one is productive. So receptive is more cognitive and productive is performance based. These two competencies do not develop in the same rate. It is not uncommon to hear people say that they can understand a particular language better than they can speak it, or vice versa. The errors are then to be classified as receptive errors and productive errors. Receptive errors, let us see the definition of receptive errors. Receptive errors are those where we have the result in listeners' misunderstanding of speaker's intention, while the productive errors are those which occur in the language learner's utterances. I talk about against. So one is the intention of the speaker. If the speaker has misunderstood any particular language and the misunderstanding of the speaker's intention cause a kind of error, it can be regarded as receptive error. So say in an interview, questions are asked to you, but you are unable to understand the language, or you cannot understand the meaning of a particular word. So you might give a wrong answer to the question, or you may ask for repetition of the question. So these are receptive errors. On the other hand, productive errors are those which occur in language learners' utterances. So it is much easier to analyze the productive errors and receptive errors. Analysis of productive errors is based on learners' utterances. But to investigate repetitive errors, one always need to look at the reaction of the people to whom the person is speaking. So address relationship should always be there. So requests, compliments and the like should always be involved in kind of communication. The way a listener behaves can give some clues as to whether the language is properly understood. The code that has been sent, the linguistic code that has been produced by the speaker, has been properly understood by the learner or not. We know that linguistics talks about signs. Language is sign that is exchanged between two persons. One creates the code, the other decodes, and this is vice versa, a kind of exchange of codes between the addresser and the addressee. So once the codes are properly decoded, there is a proper reception of language. If the codes are not properly received, receptive errors are there. If the codes are not properly produced, productive errors are committed. The way a listener behaves can therefore give us important clues, because language is talking only about verbal component, but non-verbal communication also contributes a lot in the communication process. However, there are differences, different ways in which the receptive behavior operates. Some of these are definitely linguistic specific, region specific, culture specific. Social linguistic variations are always there. So we have a strange and unprecedented response and reaction coming on the part of the speaker, even on the part of the listener, if there are serious errors committed in the exchange of the codes. Let us now again revisit the difference between errors and mistake. So say in mathematics, you know addition, but when making the addition summation, you do a mistake. What type of mistake is it? Is it silly mistake or error? So in linguistics, if you know the rule, you commit something, you know the rule, you know the proper use of the language, and you commit something that is erroneous, something that is wrong, it can be called as mistake. That means, say when you are writing and you know the spelling of the word, but consciously or unconsciously you have done a mistake in writing the proper spelling. So it can be considered as mistake. But if you do not know the proper spelling of that word and you write the word, it should be considered as an error. This is the basic difference between error and mistake. A distinction has been made between error and mistake. Errors are considered to be systematic, governed by rules, and appear because a learner's knowledge of the rules of the target language is not adequate, is incomplete. Thus, we have the indicative signs of the languages of the learner's linguistic system as faulty at a given stage of language learning. So these are likely to appear and occur repeatedly and is not recognized by the learner. The learner is not aware of the mistake that the learner is committing, and therefore these turn out into errors because these are repeated again and again. So in one page the student has written the right correct spelling because the student knows that. In the next page the student has written a wrong spelling, so that second wrong spelling is a mistake. If a student has no knowledge about the right spelling and makes a guesswork, in the first page writes the spelling that the person knows, that the student knows, and in the second page writes the same spelling that the person knows or the student knows, this should be considered as error. This is the basic difference between mistake and error. So we have that indicative of the learner's linguistic system as a given stage of learning language, that is error. So they are likely to commit the same error again and again without recognizing that they have done this. The teacher or the researcher can easily identify why this mistake has been committed, the error has been committed, and then address the underlying knowledge system of the target language of the learner, so that the error can be identified and rectified properly. Errors are always rule governed. I repeat again, errors are always rule governed. So language is creative, definitely, but language is also rule governed creativity. And when the rules are there, rules that are prescribed, so once the language is used according to the prescribed rules of grammar, of syntax, of spelling, even of pronunciation, the errors are easily recognizable. And such systematic errors that the learner commits are part of the learning process. At different stages of the learning, we have different types of errors committed by the learner. So we will now move on to contrast the errors and mistakes. So mistakes, on the other hand, are random deviations. So these are not to be related to any kind of system, and instead they represent the same type of performance mistakes that might occur in the speech or writing of native speakers. Say for example, the spelling of separate. Usually students write S-E-P-E-R-A-T, separate. The pronunciation is separate. So P-A-R-A-T, if that is the correct spelling, the student is not aware of the correct spelling and writes this as a wrong word. So this is called if the student is not aware of the right spelling and writes that spelling that the person knows, the student knows, that should be regarded as a systematic error. While if the student knows the correct spelling, but while writing the student commits the error and writes the wrong spelling, that should be regarded as a mistake. So these are also related to type of performance. Mistakes might occur in the speech or writing of the speakers. Even the native speakers can commit mistakes. Mistakes are also slips of the tongue, slips of pen, even false starts, lack of the subject-verb agreement, very common among us, is a long complicated sentence. If you are framing a long sentence with different clauses, there is a possibility of misappropriating the subject with the verb, and such mistakes are often common. But there are also mistakes where the subject-verb combination or coordination is not known to the learner, and the learner simply commits that error as a systematic one. But if the learner knows the rules, knows how to coordinate the subject and the verb, and even then commits errors because of the complication of the sentence form, syntactical form, that should be regarded as mistake. A common type of performance mistake is referred to as spoonerism. I talked about this word spoonerism. So it was after the name of the Oxford University scholar William A. Spooner, who often changed initial consonants around when he spoke. For example, instead of having said that you have missed all my history lectures, he once says completely to the students who were absent from his classes, you have missed all my mystery lectures. So just see, he has just replaced the consonants. So instead of missed, he says hissed. Instead of history, he says mystery. So this is spoonerism. Often in communication we commit such errors. Besides slip of tongues and slip of pen, another type of slip can be called as the slip of the ear. So this has been identified by Yule in 1988, which may provide some clues to how the brain tries to make sense of the auditory signals it receives. So if someone has said history, the other person has heard mystery, so there is some kind of error in the comprehension, the reception of the word. So the brain tries to make sense of whatever is heard, whatever auditory signal it receives, and that is processed. This kind of slip can result, for example, in hearing. So such errors are there common. Mistakes that are due to non-linguistic factors such as fatigue, strong emotional or memory limitations, lack of concentration are also typically random and can be corrected by the language user if brought to the attention. That means the language learner, if that person is asked to rectify the mistake, the person can easily identify the mistake and rectify it. So it is just absent-mindedness, and because of lethargy, because of just amnesia, memory loss, or some kind of lack of concentration, such errors can be committed in a random manner. So I stated Corder had been right in assuming that native speakers and second language learners are both subject to similar external conditions like memory lapses and tiredness while using the first or the second language. So Corder appears to have overlooked the fact that the effect of such non-linguistic factors on the first and the second language user is not the same. Anyone who has attempted to express himself or herself in the second or the foreign language under any kind of condition will definitely agree that yes, the language could have been performed in a far more effective manner if the language has been properly rehearsed beforehand. So we can therefore distinguish between learner's error and mistakes. That has to some extent been problematic. From the point of view of the person committing error and mistake, it is very easy to identify which one is error and which one is mistake. But from the perspective of the evaluator, it is very difficult to identify whether the grammatical structure of the sentence that the student has written contains error or contains a mistake. So it is very difficult from the evaluation perspective. So nevertheless, we can come to a kind of general criteria adopted by most of the analysts and lists of errors that distinguish between the error and mistake according to the frequency of occurrence. I said, say the spelling of William Shakespeare. If the student is committing the same error throughout the script, the spelling of William Shakespeare, that should be regarded as error, because the student does not know the real spelling of that particular name. It can be regarded as mistake if the student writes different types of spelling in different, and there is a kind of randomness in the use of the spelling. But this random, say in some case he writes EARE, in some case PHEAR, so such errors can be regarded as mistakes. So we can therefore distinguish mistakes and errors by the frequency of occurrence. That means the errors which have a rather low frequency are considered as mistake. Performance errors that have a high frequency, that are systematic, that are regular, can be regarded as errors. But it does not seem that legitimate. It doesn't seem legitimate to consider that frequency alone is the sole criteria of language. So we cannot differentiate between an error and a mistake based on the frequency of the occurrence. In some cases, low frequency of certain errors might be there. Indeed, due to the low frequency of grammatical patterns involved or awareness of the strategy employed by the learners, so errors can be committed. So it is suggested therefore that we should focus on the basic distinction between errors and mistakes. Let us assume that in our analysis of errors produced, a Hindi speaking learner of English or Bangla speaking learner of English, we come across some utterance, and in the utterance we have a regular phenomena where the error, say ing use in the speakers, especially the Indian speakers of English, the propensity of using ings. I remember Ezekiel's poem, sir, yeah, my progress is progressing. So ing use, repetitive use of ing, would you consider this as an error or as mistake? So this should be considered as error because the person is not aware of the proper use of ing suffix. So the significance of errors should have been identified, and we know that in English language teaching and learning process, errors are very significant. They should be properly identified, they should be evaluated properly, and proper analysis of error make our language learning possible. So we have different branches and uses of error analysis, and such branches of error analysis should be kept in mind with the views that Cordon and Richards they have identified. They say that errors are significant because linguists, Chomsky has suggested, that the study of human language is the most fruitful way of discovering what constitutes human intelligence. We express our entire knowledge and thought process through language. So Chomsky, Noam Chomsky suggested that the study of human language is perhaps the most fruitful way to identify and discover what constitutes human intelligence. Even the psycholinguists, they also talk about this, looking at children's psychosocial development with the help of language, especially through speech, as compared with the adult speech. They have already shown us that they have been able to examine the nature and processes that are involved in the mind, mental processes that seem to be involved in the production and development of language. Teachers also should take this into account, because by analyzing learners' error, they should also be able to discover their difficulties and devise methods of comparing them, identifying them, rectifying them. So there are different branches of error analysis. Number one, we can say theoretical. Simple branch of error analysis that can be called theoretical. The second can be called applied, as we are also using applied linguistics in our ELT. So errors, number one, theoretical analysis, and number two, applied analysis. Theoretical error analysis, as stated in my previous discussion, is concerned with the process and strategies of second language learning, and it is easily identifiable through a comparative analysis, similarities with first language acquisition. In this sense, error analysis is one of the central activities in the entire psycholinguistic investigation of the language learning process. So we can seek to identify the errors by searching for the nature of language learning in general. What is actually going on in the mind of the learner of English as a second language. True language learning is a process that necessarily involves errors. As learners are exposed to samples of target language, they form hypotheses about it. Frequently, the initial hypotheses seem to be inadequate and failing to recognize the limits of a particular rule or exception to the rule. Study of errors made by the foreign language learner reveals much about the process of language learning and the factors that affect the process. So theoretical implications are there. Application of such theories for the study of language learning process and error analysis can be regarded as the second process, or applied error analysis. Cordell points out that the study of learning of second language, similar to the child's language studies and general linguistic studies, has the object of discovering universal. The study of errors also is a part of the psycholinguistic search for the universal process of the second language learning. Now we have to deal with two different aspects. Number A, do the speakers of the same mother tongue learning a second language follow the same course of development? And number B, is there any internal blueprint or syllabus for learning a second language which would represent the psychologically natural route between mother tongue and the target language? So psycholinguists believe that such a route is determined by the inherent cognitive properties of the human mind. Error analysis, therefore, can be characterized as an attempt to account for the learner's error that could not be previously explained in the 1960s by contrastive analysis or the behaviorist theory. And in this respect, it is quite successful, you can say. So this English as a second language, in that environment, error analysis can have greater value and usefulness than contrastive analysis, since pedagogical value of the latter downplays under such environment, according to Falahi, who commented in 1991. I repeat the comment that in an ESL environment, error analysis can have greater value and usefulness than contrastive analysis, since the pedagogical value of the latter downplays under such environment. So Johansson in 1975 had earlier identified this error analysis as the best tool for describing and explaining errors made by second or foreign language learner. So he also explained errors that are made by the second or foreign language learner. So in the study of error analysis, we find that there is a significant development in the theoretical consciousness, and when we have this application of the theoretical consciousness raising of applied linguistics and the application of the rules of error analysis, we have the proper understanding of applied linguistics. Sridhar in 1981 identifies some goals that are usually used in error analysis. So what are the goals that are identified in applied error analysis by Sridhar? Number one, determining the sequence of the presentation of target language items in textbook and classrooms. I repeat again, determining the sequence of the presentation of target language items in textbook and classrooms, with difficult items following the easier ones. So there should be stepwise determination of sequence of the errors that are committed in the use of the target language, and in the syllabus, in the textbook, and in the classroom practice also, classroom sessions also, we have to identify the errors in a systematic way from the lesser difficult one to a more difficult ones. Number two, Sridhar also said that deciding the relative degree of emphasis, explanation and practice required in putting across various items in the target language, thereby devising remedial lessons and exercises. So error analysis should also be used for pedagogic purpose, according to Sridhar, to devise remedial lessons and exercises. And finally, he said that evaluation and testing should also include this error analysis in order to judge the proficiency achieved by the learner. So selective items for testing the learner's proficiency should also be included in error analysis. So as far as methodology is concerned, as far as the theoretical aspect is concerned, or the applied error analysis is concerned, now we have the basic procedures of identification of errors and their classification of different linguistic categories. So we understand that language has different components. We know that 4 basic skills are to be learned. What are these 4 basic skills? L for listening, S for speaking, R for reading, W for writing. These are the 4 basic skills. And in order to learn these 4 basic skills, the students must learn all the components of language. What are the basic components of language? Let us take from the smallest unit, that is the phonological component. Then we have the morphological component. Then we have the syntactical component. Then we have the semantic component. So we have all these components all equally used in language learning. So these should be always taken into account by the user of the language, and error analysis becomes a fundamental component of pedagogical process. Such pedagogical process must involve the identification of errors as far as possible and practicable. So we have to classify errors into different linguistic categories. However, at this point of my lecture, I must talk about 2 branches of error analysis that diverge from each other. The branches I already stated. What are these branches of error analysis? One is based on a systematic identification of the error, and the number 2 is the systematic addressing of the errors or rectification process. Applied error analysis attempts to find a therapy of learners' difficulty and in the target language by devising certain kinds of remedial materials. The goal of therefore theoretical error analysis is to address theoretical analysis. What is the primary goal? The primary goal is to address to the psychological reality of errors. That is, the teacher attempts to explain why and how the errors are committed. Such an attempt will bring the analyst face to face with the causes of errors. However, it needs to be pointed out that explanations with regard to the cause of errors are largely based on speculation, for it is extremely difficult, if not possible, to read the mind of the learner. Whatever it may be, this should not dissuade the analyst from trying to make correct interpretation of the learner's intended meaning, that means what the learner wanted to write and what the learner has actually written, what the learner wanted to speak and what the learner had actually spoken. Therefore, error analyst should always try to identify exactly the difference between the mind and the performance, the cognitive process and the performance. Thus, we can conclude that error analysis proves useful both at the theoretical and practical level. Apart from the intrinsic validity as an effective tool or instrument for pedagogy as well as research in second language acquisition, error analysis can be of a great help for the designer of syllabus, for a classroom teacher, and for even the test maker. So, person who is creating the question papers. Such insights gained from error analysis with regard to the process and strategies of second language learning provide valuable information for devising appropriate study materials for effective teaching techniques and constructing exams or tests suitable for different groups of learners at different levels of instruction. So, we have Corder, the study of errors, who provided the teachers with information about how much the learner had learned. He also provided the researchers with evidence of how language was learned. He also served as devices by which the learner discovered the rules of target language. So, he also identified different steps that should be taken in any kind of research on error analysis. What are these? So, these are more empirical in nature. So, any person who is thinking about research in the error analysis in English language teaching must also follow such steps. So, number one, Corder said that one must collect samples of language learner. After collecting samples of learner's language, the researcher must identify the errors. The third step should be to describe such errors. Number 4 should be the explanation of errors, and number 5 should be evaluation of errors. So, these are the five portions, 5 steps that a researcher must take. I repeat the steps again. Number 1, collection of the sample of language containing errors. Number 2, identification of errors. Number 3, description of errors. Number 4, explanation of error. Number 5, evaluation of error. If we just go back to this again, so type of applied linguistic. So, apart from the theoretical part, there is also application of the same theory to our study of error analysis. So, while in the theoretical part, we must know what error analysis is, what are the different types, what is the difference between error analysis and mistake. So, what are the differences, different types of errors committed by a learner. In the applied part, first we have to give some test where some sentences are given. The students must be asked to identify the error. Number 2, the student has to say whether this is an error or this is a mistake. Third, the student may be asked to describe the error or mistake. Number 4, the student has to explain the real reason for committing the error or mistake. And after evaluation of the error, the student's error, the teacher must also try to write the correct form of that sentence. So, in the second part, where we have the application of error analysis, we must follow these. Number 1, identification of error. Number 2, description of error. Number 3, explanation of error. And number 4, evaluation of error. And after evaluation of error, the rectified form of the sentence should be written in the test. So, this constitutes the entire process of error analysis. So, we have different types of contribution in error analysis, and such method, first method that is used to investigate the language learning, and it has definitely served a very good tool for providing empirical evidence for different types of schools of language learning, the behaviorist and the cognitivist or the mentalist school of language learning. So, it has again again affirmed the claim of the creativeness of language learning process. It has recognized that errors are something very natural to human beings, and errors should be identified properly, errors should be avoided, and inevitable feature of learning process is the identification, rectification of errors. So everything that the learner utters is by definition a grammatical utterance according to Coder, and in such grammatical utterances, by identifying the errors and then rectifying the errors, a learner can adequately develop good language learning skills. There are of course some certain limitations in language analysis. Error analysis has weakness in methodological process. Sometimes it fails to provide a complete picture of learner's language. In some cases it takes no account of what the learners do correctly or the development over time. So we can just conclude with this analysis that a reassessment of error analysis should be there, and it is proper to replace that contrastive analysis at old school, and serious attempts should be made to investigate the learner's language, especially with reference to the second language, English language, as L2, and through this investigation of the learner's error, a proper kind of language learning is possible. So there are different types of errors representing the different stages of language development, and such errors should be taken into account. So the probable questions or topics for discussions that evolved. So first, can we differentiate between the behaviorist school and the mentalist school, the behaviorist and the cognitive school of language acquisition, and how do they look at error or mistakes? So what is the main difficulty for the second language learner according to the structural linguistics or according to the contrastive linguistics? So what are the benefits of identification of errors? Are errors a part of the learning process? What are the basis of error analysis? What are the differences between, say, receptive and productive errors? So we can also talk about the main features of the second language development with reference to error analysis. So what are the values attributed to the identification of error from the viewpoint of a teacher, and what role should the teacher play in the analysis of such errors? What are the differences between systematic and post-systematic stages of second language acquisition? So these are the theoretical questions that can be asked. The second is the applied question, where you will be given sentence, and in such sentences you have to identify in a proper way, you have to identify the errors in the sentence. First you have to say whether this is an error or a mistake. Then you have to explain through a description of the error why the error has been committed, what type of error is this, whether this is a morphological error, a syntactical error. Phonological errors cannot be identified in the written form. So spelling errors or syntactical errors are to be identified. And finally the students are to be informed about the error they have committed, and therefore the last statement should be the correct form of the sentence. So these are the probable topics of discussion and the types of questions that come with error analysis. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you very much.